A savage winter wrapped the city in white as a Navy SEAL in his Navy working uniform drove toward a forgotten cabin on the edge of the woods. He came seeking silence, carrying only his past and his German shepherd, Ghost, riding watch beside him. The cabin cost just $500. Too cheap, too quiet, too wrong. Inside, while the storm howled, Ghost stopped cold, ears flat, body tense, fixated on the stone fireplace. He wasn't afraid, he was warning him. Beneath solid rock lay a secret buried for years. One powerful people would kill to keep sealed. Walking away meant safety. Digging deeper meant war. The SEAL didn't choose comfort. He didn't choose escape. He chose loyalty to the truth and to the dog who never failed him. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances move you, subscribe for more. Winter had swallowed Duluth whole. The city lay buried beneath a skin of blinding white, the kind of snow that reflected light so fiercely it hurt to stare at, turning streets into frozen mirrors and rooftops into sharp-edged silhouettes against a pale sky. Lake Superior was a vast, unmoving sheet of steel blue ice, stretching endlessly, breathing cold into every alley and road. The wind off the lake cut through fabric and bone alike, carrying the smell of frost and iron, and it made even long-time residents walk with their shoulders hunched, as if bracing against something unseen. It was into this harsh, shining winter that Ethan Walker drove, his old truck pushing steadily through snow-packed roads, engine humming with disciplined restraint, headlights carving two narrow tunnels through the white. Ethan wore his Navy working uniform as if it were still part of his skin. The camouflage fabric was clean but faded in places, shaped to a body that had been trained, broken down, and rebuilt with purpose. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his strength compact rather than showy. His face was sharply defined, cheekbones high, jaw squared and dusted with a permanent shadow of stubble that never quite disappeared, no matter how closely he shaved. A thin scar traced the edge of his right eyebrow, pale against weathered skin that had seen too much sun and too much cold. His eyes were a steady gray blue, the kind that missed very little and revealed even less. To strangers, he looked distant, almost indifferent. To those who knew him well, few as they were, he carried himself with the quiet intensity of someone who had learned the cost of hesitation and never forgotten it. In the passenger seat sat Ghost. The German shepherd was 9 years old, large even for his breed, his body lean and powerful beneath a thick double coat of rare silver gray and pale ash tones. His fur caught the winter light in strange ways, almost luminous, giving him the look of a wolf shaped from snow and steel. His muzzle had begun to frost with white, but his amber eyes remained sharp, alert, and deeply intelligent. Ghost moved with disciplined calm, every shift of his weight deliberate, every flick of his ears meaningful. He had the posture of a sentry, even while seated, head high, gaze tracking the world beyond the windshield. He was not a pet. He was a partner, forged in places Ethan never spoke about, trained by necessity, loyalty, and survival. The cabin appeared at the end of a narrow, snow-choked road, its outline emerging slowly from the trees. It stood alone near the edge of a frozen inlet, a low structure of dark logs and stone that seemed to sink into the surrounding white rather than stand against it. The price had been absurd, $500 for land and shelter in a city where winter alone could kill the unprepared. Ethan had known immediately that no bargain came without a reason. Still, he had paid without negotiating. Silence was worth the risk. As he stepped out of the truck, the cold bit hard. The air smelled clean, painfully so, stripped of softness by the snow. Ghost exited beside him, boots crunching, paws silent, already scanning the tree line with measured focus. From a distance, a pair of neighbors watched from across the road, bundled in heavy coats, their faces half hidden by scarves. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. Their eyes followed Ethan with something like pity, or perhaps resignation, as if he were a man willingly stepping into a story whose ending everyone else already knew. The cabin door groaned as Ethan pushed it open. Inside, dust lay thick over everything, but the room was not dark. Winter light filtered through grimy windows, scattering across the wooden floor and bare walls, giving the space a cold, luminous clarity. The air smelled of old wood, ashes, and time. A simple table stood near the center, one leg slightly shorter than the others. A rusted bed frame leaned against the far wall. Dominating the room was a stone fireplace, its wide hearth built from heavy, uneven slabs, soot-stained and silent. Ghost moved first. He circled the room once, slow and methodical, nose low, reading scents layered over years. His tail remained neutral, his breathing steady. For a moment, everything felt almost peaceful. Ethan watched him, shoulders easing just a fraction. Maybe it really was just an abandoned place with a bad reputation. Maybe silence could still be bought. Then Ghost stopped. He froze in front of the fireplace, body rigid, ears angling forward, then flattening slightly. A low sound rolled from his chest, not a growl, not fear, but something deeper and more uncertain. He leaned forward and sniffed the stones, focusing on a specific section of the hearth. His paw lifted and scraped once, softly, then again. His nose pressed closer, breath fogging against cold rock. "Easy," Ethan murmured, stepping closer. "Probably mice." Ghost didn't move. He shifted his stance, planting himself squarely in front of the fireplace, blocking it as if standing guard. A faint whine escaped him, controlled but insistent, and he scratched again, claws clicking against stone with deliberate precision. This was not agitation. This was alert. Ethan's spine tightened. He had seen this posture before, in places far from snow and cabins, moments before something hidden revealed itself. He crouched beside Ghost, ran a gloved hand along the dog's back, feeling the tension beneath the fur. The stone looked no different from the rest, heavy, old, inert. Still, Ghost refused to look away. A knock at the door broke the moment. Ben Carter stood outside, snow clinging to his boots and the hem of his jacket. He was in his early 40s. Average height and build, with a broad, friendly face reddened by the cold. A short beard framed his mouth, more out of habit than style, and his eyes were quick and curious, always scanning for reactions. Ben had grown up in Duluth and worked as a mechanic a few streets over, the kind of man who talked easily and laughed often, using humor to smooth over discomfort. He leaned against the doorframe now, glancing between Ethan and the dog. "Your shepherd asking for dinner?" Ben said with a crooked grin. "We're planning a treasure hunt?" Ethan allowed the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. "Not sure yet." Ben chuckled, but his gaze lingered on Ghost a moment longer than necessary. The dog's eyes never left the fireplace. There was no playfulness in them now, no curiosity, only focus. "Well," Ben said, rubbing his hands together, "welcome to the neighborhood. If you need tools or supplies, you know where to find me." He hesitated, then added, lighter than he felt, "Place has character." When Ben left, the cabin seemed quieter than before. The light dimmed as afternoon slid toward evening, the sky outside deepening into steel gray. Ethan lit a lantern and set it on the table. The glow warmed the room, but did nothing to ease the tension coiled in his chest. Night fell quickly. The wind rose, moaning through the trees, rattling the cabin with long, hollow sighs. Ethan lay on his sleeping bag, boots still on, one hand resting on Ghost's neck. The dog stayed awake, ears twitching at every sound. Snow tapped against the windows like restless fingers. Then it came. A soft, sharp sound. Cock. Ethan's eyes opened instantly. The noise came from the fireplace. Another pause. Then again, clearer this time. Cock. As if something on the other side of the stone had answered Ghost's silent warning. Ghost rose to his feet, muscles taut, and let out a single, low sound that vibrated through the room. Whatever waited beneath that stone was no rumor. It was listening. Morning in Duluth arrived without mercy. The sky was a pale sheet of winter light, flat and unforgiving, the kind that made every flaw stand out. Snowbanks along the streets were carved into hard, dirty walls by plows, and the wind off Lake Superior swept through downtown corridors like a living thing, biting at exposed skin and rattling metal signs. Ethan Walker parked his truck outside the St. Louis County Administrative Center and sat for a moment, engine idling, hands steady on the wheel. Ghost remained in the passenger seat, posture upright, amber eyes fixed on the building ahead as if it were an unfamiliar animal whose intentions needed careful reading. Inside, the building smelled of old paper, disinfectant, and damp wool coats. The heat was uneven, blasting in some corners and absent in others, creating pockets of stale warmth and lingering cold. Ethan moved through the hallways in his Navy working uniform, boots echoing softly on tile. Conversations dipped as he passed. People looked up, looked away, then looked again, their curiosity sharpened by something closer to fear. He had felt this kind of attention before, in foreign places where the air itself seemed to watch you. He reached the records wing and waited at a counter cluttered with clipboards and faded notices. That was when he noticed her. Sarah Miller stood just beyond the counter, half hidden behind a rolling cart stacked with archival boxes. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, her posture slightly stooped from years of leaning over documents. Her hair was a muted chestnut brown, pulled back into a loose knot that never quite held, soft strands framing a narrow face dusted with freckles. Her skin was pale in the winter light, not fragile but unaccustomed to sunlight, and her eyes, clear hazel, sharp despite their tiredness, lingered on Ethan longer than courtesy allowed. There was something guarded about her expression, as if she were measuring risk with every breath. "You're here about the Miller property," she said quietly, not a question. Ethan nodded. "Final paperwork." Sarah hesitated, fingers tightening on the edge of the cart. "Are you sure you want to keep it?" Her voice dropped further, almost swallowed by the hum of the building. "Some people buy land to flip it. Others regret staying." Ethan studied her face. There was no drama in it, no thrill-seeking curiosity, only concern edged with something heavier. "Why would I regret it?" She glanced down the hall, then back at him. "That file's been stuck for a long time." She retrieved a folder from beneath the cart and slid it across the counter. The paper was yellowed, corners soft from handling. As Ethan flipped through it, patterns emerged. Years of unpaid taxes, notices issued, then rescinded, inspection reports filed without signatures, stamps that looked blurred, as if pressed over older marks, pages missing entirely, their absence more telling than what remained. "They call it the ghost cabin," Sarah said, a faint, humorless smile touching her lips. "A journalist lived there once, Arthur Miller. He asked questions people didn't like. Then, one winter, he stopped showing up. Truck still parked, cabin still standing. Man gone." Ethan closed the folder slowly. He had seen disappearances before, had learned to read the space people left behind. "No investigation?" "There was," she said. "On paper." Her jaw tightened. After that, the land just waited. No buyers, no bids, like it was holding its breath. Footsteps approached from the far end of the hall, heavier than most, confident. Sarah straightened instantly, her expression smoothing into professional neutrality. Sheriff Tom Briggs appeared with a broad smile and a presence that filled space without effort. He was in his mid-50s, tall and thick through the shoulders, his body solid in the way of men who had grown into authority rather than earned it. A heavy mustache dominated his face, peppered with gray, carefully groomed. His cheeks were ruddy from cold, and his eyes, dark, glossy, moved constantly, cataloging details. He wore his uniform like a badge of reassurance, projecting warmth that felt rehearsed. "Well now," Briggs said, his voice rich and friendly, "you must be our new landowner." Ethan extended a hand. "Ethan Walker." Briggs shook it firmly, grip lingering just a second longer than necessary. "Tom Briggs, Sheriff. I like to make a point of welcoming folks personally." His gaze flicked to the folder in Ethan's hands. "That place has stories, but most of them are just that. Stories." Sarah said nothing. She busied herself aligning papers that were already straight. Briggs leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Small towns have long memories. People get bored, start dressing up old rumors. Best advice? Don't dig into what doesn't concern you. You'll enjoy the quiet more that way." Ethan met his eyes. "I prefer understanding what I own." Briggs's smile didn't falter, but something behind it cooled. "Of course you do." He clapped Ethan lightly on the shoulder. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." Outside, Ghost watched through the windshield as Briggs exited the building. The dog's ears flattened slightly, his gaze tracking the sheriff until he disappeared around the corner. A low, nearly inaudible sound vibrated in his throat, not a growl, but not approval either. Ethan returned to the truck, paperwork secured. He was sliding the folder into the glove compartment when Sarah appeared beside the passenger door. Up close, she looked thinner than before, Tension etched into the lines around her mouth. "I shouldn't do this," she whispered, glancing toward the building entrance. "But someone should have." She pressed a folded slip of paper into Ethan's palm. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "If you dig," she said, voice barely a breath, "dig in the right place. The wrong one will get you killed." Before he could ask anything, she stepped back, turned, and walked away, her shoulders rigid as if bracing for impact. Ethan unfolded the paper, a set of coordinates. No name, no explanation. Ghost shifted in his seat, eyes lifting to Ethan's face, reading him the way he always did. Whatever lay ahead, the silence around the cabin was no accident. The wind surged down the street, carrying the scent of snow and something sharper beneath it. Ethan started the engine and drove, the folded paper warm in his pocket, its weight heavier than any deed. The coordinates Sarah had given him led away from Duluth's plowed streets and tidy storefronts into a quieter, harsher world. As Ethan Walker drove north, the city thinned out quickly, buildings giving way to long stretches of snowbound trees and frozen marshland. The winter sun hung low but bright, scattering hard white light across the landscape. Snow lay deep and untouched beyond the road's edge, pristine enough to feel accusatory, as if the land itself were watching who dared to cross it. Ghost sat upright in the passenger seat, his silver-gray coat catching the glare, eyes moving constantly from tree line to road, cataloging threats that had not yet revealed themselves. The paved road narrowed into cracked asphalt, then gravel, then finally a rutted track barely visible beneath packed snow. Ethan slowed instinctively. This was no longer a drive, it was an approach. Within minutes, the first obstacle appeared. A massive pine tree toppled across the road at a bend where the slope fell sharply to one side. It had fallen too cleanly, its trunk positioned at just the right angle to force any vehicle close to the drop-off. Ethan stopped, studying it through the windshield. Wind rocked the branches gently, shedding glittering frost. "Too neat," he muttered. He reversed carefully, maneuvered around the edge where the snow crust was strongest, and eased past with inches to spare. Ghost's ears stayed pinned forward, body rigid, tail still. The dog was not confused, he was alert. They continued, only to encounter a broken fence 100 yards later. The posts had been snapped low, not weathered down by time, but splintered sharply as if struck with intent. Rusted wire hung loose, dragging across the track, catching the undercarriage with a metallic screech that made Ghost lift his head and release a short, controlled huff. By the third obstacle, a narrowing of the trail where thorny underbrush crowded one side and a shallow ravine yawned on the other, Ethan no longer doubted it. This was not neglect. It was discouragement, laid carefully over years, meant to turn back anyone without patience, skill, or stubbornness. Someone had wanted this place isolated but not officially closed, hidden in plain sight. Experience shaped his thoughts. Years of training as a Navy SEAL had taught him that the most effective defenses often looked accidental. A rock here, a fallen tree there, nothing obvious, nothing illegal, just enough friction to make people choose easier paths. Ethan drove on, jaw set, the truck's tires biting into packed snow, engine steady and disciplined, just like him. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked smaller than he remembered, crouched beneath snow-laden branches like an animal bracing for impact. Smoke did not rise from its chimney. No tracks marred the clearing beyond those he had left earlier. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy, broken only by wind whispering through the pines. Inside, the light was sharper than before, winter sun forcing its way through the dirty windows and throwing stark lines across the floor. The dust had settled again, undisturbed. Ethan removed his gloves and rubbed his hands together, breath fogging. Ghost moved immediately to the fireplace. This time there was no hesitation. The dog went straight to a specific section at the base of the hearth, nose pressed low, breathing fast but controlled. His paw lifted and scraped once, twice, then stopped. He lowered his head and sniffed deeply, focusing on a single flat stone whose edges looked subtly different from the rest. Straighter, cleaner, its outline too precise to be natural. Ghost's body tensed, muscles standing out beneath his thick coat, and he angled his shoulder toward Ethan, a silent summons. "All right," Ethan said softly, kneeling. He scraped away a layer of soot with his knife. Beneath it, the stone's edge gleamed faintly. There was a dark line along the seam, sticky and matte, nothing like the crumbly gray mortar around it. It smelled faintly of resin. Pitch, Ethan murmured. Old, hardened, deliberately applied. He straightened as the sound of tires crunching on snow approached outside. Ghost's head snapped up, ears swiveling. The tension in him did not ease until the familiar voice drifted through the door. "Hope I'm not interrupting an excavation?" Ben Carter stepped inside, carrying a canvas tool bag slung over one shoulder. He stamped snow from his boots and grinned, breath puffing white. In daylight, he looked much the same as before. Average build, work-worn hands, brown hair hidden under a knit cap, beard trimmed short. There was an ease to him, the kind of man who made friends quickly and enemies rarely, using humor like a shield. Still, his eyes flicked to Ghost, then to the fireplace, and his grin thinned just a touch. "Figured you'd need some basics," Ben said, setting the bag down. "Crowbar, scraper, flashlight, cabin starter kit," he chuckled. "I still don't know if you bought a house or adopted a problem." "Maybe both," Ethan replied. Ben leaned against the table, arms crossed, glancing around. "You noticed the road coming in?" he asked casually. "I did." Ben nodded once. "My granddad used to say that road had a mind of its own. People would start down it and change their minds halfway." He shrugged. "I always thought that was just winter talking." Ghost let out a low sound, deep and steady, eyes fixed back on the stone. Ben's gaze followed, and for a moment his joking mask slipped. "Your dog," he said quietly. "He ever act like that before?" "Yes," Ethan said. He did not elaborate. Ben cleared his throat and straightened. "Well, tools are yours. I've got work." He paused at the door, glancing back once. "If you need help, you know where I am." The words were simple, but there was an unspoken line beneath them. Help came with limits. When Ben left, the cabin felt tighter, as if the walls had leaned in while no one was watching. Ethan returned to the fireplace, heart steady, senses sharp. He ran his fingers along the pitch-sealed seam. This stone had been meant to come out, not easily, not accidentally, but deliberately, by someone who knew it was there. He wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam and applied gentle pressure. Nothing moved. He adjusted his angle, pushed again. The pitch resisted, stretching slightly, then holding firm. Ghost's growl deepened, a vibration that Ethan felt in his chest. It was not fear. It was recognition. Ethan paused. From the narrow gap he had created came a scent that did not belong to old wood or ash or damp stone. It was sharp and cold, metallic in a way that set his nerves on edge. The smell of sealed containers, of machinery, of places where air had been trapped too long. Ghost reacted instantly. His growl dropped an octave, low and resonant, the sound of a dog that remembered dark rooms and hidden threats from another life. His hackles rose, silver-gray fur bristling in the hard winter light, and he leaned forward, ready, eyes burning amber. Ethan slowly released the pressure on the crowbar. Whatever lay beneath that stone was not meant to be discovered casually. It had been hidden by someone who understood concealment and danger. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying snow through the trees in bright, swirling sheets. The road back to the city lay behind layers of deliberate obstacles. Ahead, beneath a single stone, something waited. Ethan met Ghost's gaze and nodded once. Not yet, he decided, but soon. Ethan waited until the wind settled into a steady, predictable rhythm before he acted. Winter had a way of masking small sounds, but it also magnified mistakes, and he had learned long ago that patience was a form of armor. He slid the crowbar back into the seam and applied pressure slowly, evenly, feeling the resistance of hardened pitch fight him before it began to yield. The stone did not move easily. It had been set by someone who understood weight and leverage, someone who wanted removal to be possible, but not quick. With a dull, reluctant groan, the seal finally broke. The slab lifted just enough for cold air to breathe upward from below, carrying that same metallic scent Ghost had warned him about. The opening revealed a cavity deeper than Ethan expected, its walls lined with carefully fitted stone blocks, dry and intact despite the cabin's age. This was no crude hole dug in haste. It was deliberate, engineered to last. He widened the opening and set the slab aside with a controlled thud, the sound echoing hollowly in the small room. Ghost leaned forward, sniffed once, then stepped back, posture easing, tail lowering to neutral. The tension that had coiled him tight for hours drained away as if a switch had been flipped. His task, alert, identify, confirm, was complete. Ethan lowered himself into the cavity. It was just deep enough to require a careful step down, the stone floor cold beneath his boots. The space smelled of sealed air and dust, not rot. A lantern's glow revealed two objects resting side by side like offerings. A rectangular metal box, military green, edges reinforced and corners scuffed, its latch secured with a heavy clasp, and a stack of leather-bound notebooks tied together with faded twine, the leather worn smooth by handling. No coins, no jewels, no obvious treasure. Whatever had been hidden here had been hidden for a reason that had nothing to do with wealth. He lifted the notebooks first. They were heavier than they looked, pages thick and densely filled. The handwriting was tight, disciplined, the lines pressed hard into the paper as if the writer feared the words might escape. Ethan climbed out of the cavity and set them on the table, Ghost settling beside him with a quiet huff, eyes watchful but calm. The dog's demeanor was striking, no longer anxious, no longer warning. This was the after-action state Ethan recognized well. Mission acknowledged, perimeter re-established. Ethan opened the first notebook at random. The opening pages were dated years back and began mundanely enough. Observations about weather, the condition of the road, notes on repairs to the cabin. But the tone shifted quickly. The writer described inspections that came without notice, fines issued for violations that didn't exist, permits suddenly questioned after years of approval. Names appeared again and again, always in the margins, always followed by question marks. There was anger in the words, but also restraint, as if the writer knew emotion could be used against him. "This is a siege," Ethan murmured to himself. "A slow one." He flipped ahead. References to a corporation surfaced repeatedly, its name underlined, circled, rewritten, as if the writer were testing different ways to understand it. Notes about water samples followed, streams, wells, runoff points around the city and beyond. The entries grew sharper, more urgent. "Paperwork is their weapon," one line read. "They bleed you quietly until you leave or break." Ethan had seen similar tactics overseas, different tools, but the same intent: control the environment, isolate the target, make resistance too exhausting to sustain. He reached for the metal box next. It was heavier than expected, its weight dense and uncompromising. He tested the latch, locked, not rusted shut, maintained. Whoever sealed this had intended it to be opened again someday, by someone who knew it mattered. Ethan did not force it yet. He wanted to understand what he was holding before he crossed that line. The sound of an engine reached him then, faint at first, then unmistakable. Ghost's head lifted, ears angling toward the window. Tires crunched on snow outside, slow and deliberate. Ethan closed the notebook and slid both it and the metal box back toward the cavity, covering them loosely with a scrap of canvas he'd found earlier. He replaced the stone slab carefully, seating it just enough to disguise the opening without resealing it completely. The room returned to its earlier state, the fireplace once again inert and ordinary. Through the window, he saw the vehicle pull into the clearing, a county-issued SUV, dark against the white, lights off. It idled for a moment, engine low and steady like an animal catching its breath. A knock came at the door. Firm, polite, Ghost rose and positioned himself beside Ethan, body angled, ready but silent. Ethan opened the door just enough to see the man standing there. Sheriff Tom Briggs smiled as if this were a social call. In daylight, his presence felt even more imposing. His coat was heavy, official, its badge catching the winter light. Snow clung to his boots, but not much. He had not struggled to get here. His mustache was neatly combed, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his eyes bright and assessing. They flicked briefly past Ethan's shoulder, scanning the interior with casual familiarity. "Afternoon," Briggs said. "Cold day to be settling in?" Ethan nodded. "Didn't expect company." Briggs chuckled softly. "Didn't expect to be out this way myself, but my dispatcher mentioned your paperwork finally cleared. Figured I'd check in, make sure you weren't having trouble." His gaze drifted again, lingering on the fireplace for half a second too long. This place can be misleading. Ghost let out a low breath, barely audible, his eyes locked on the sheriff. Briggs noticed. He shifted his weight, smile tightening just slightly. "Fine animal you've got there," he said. "Protective." "He's trained," Ethan replied evenly. Briggs nodded, as if that explained everything. "Well, if you need anything, you know how to reach me." He stepped back, boots crunching. "And my advice stands. Some histories are better left alone." As the sheriff returned to his vehicle and drove away, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Ethan closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed, listening to the fading engine. Ghost remained still until the sound vanished entirely, then relaxed, padding back toward the fireplace as if drawn by gravity. Ethan reopened the cavity and retrieved the notebooks and box. Whatever was in them had already drawn attention. That meant the stakes had shifted. This was no longer about an abandoned cabin or a curious dog. It was about something powerful enough to keep a man watching from behind a badge. He sat at the table and opened the notebook again, this time reading from the beginning. The story that unfolded was not one of sudden violence, but of erosion, of pressure applied so gradually it could be mistaken for coincidence, and beneath it all, a fear that grew sharper with every page that someone would come knocking before the truth could surface. Outside, the winter sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the snow. Ethan felt the weight of the decision settling into him, heavy and irrevocable. He had not come here looking for a fight, but he recognized one when it found him. Ghost rested his head against Ethan's knee, amber eyes steady, unwavering. Whatever lay ahead, he would not face it alone. Sheriff Tom Briggs did not leave immediately after his knock. He lingered, boots planted firmly on the cabin's warped floorboards, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as if the space itself belonged to him. In the muted winter light, his uniform looked immaculate, creased, clean, authoritative. Briggs had the build of a man who had never needed to hurry in his life. Thick neck, wide chest, a body shaped by years behind a desk rather than on a trail. His mustache was trimmed with almost military care, and his cheeks carried the permanent flush of someone accustomed to cold air and public attention. Up close, Ethan could see faint lines at the corners of the sheriff's eyes, the kind carved by practiced smiles rather than laughter. "Just checking in," Briggs repeated, his tone warm, almost neighborly. "New owners sometimes underestimate this place." His gaze drifted, slow and deliberate, around the cabin. He took in the bare table, the lantern, the bed frame. Then, inevitably, his eyes settled on the stone fireplace. Not long, just long enough to register interest before he masked it again. "Anything unusual so far?" Briggs asked lightly. "Strange noises, maybe. Folks say this cabin has a way of holding on to stories." Before Ethan could answer, Ghost stepped forward. The German shepherd moved without sound, placing his body half a step in front of Ethan's leg. In the daylight, his silver-gray coat looked almost sculpted, thick fur catching the pale glow that filtered through the window. He stood perfectly still, head level, amber eyes fixed on the sheriff. A low growl rolled from his chest, not loud, not threatening, but unmistakable. It was the restrained warning of an animal that understood power and did not respect it easily. Briggs noticed. His smile tightened, just slightly. "Easy, boy," he said, holding his hands out in a placating gesture. "Didn't mean any harm." "He's doing his job," Ethan replied calmly. "So am I." For a moment something unreadable passed across Briggs's face. Then he chuckled, the sound hollow. "Well, that's fair. I'll let you get back to settling in." He tipped an imaginary hat, turned, and stepped back into the snow. "Remember what I said. Some places are better left alone." The door closed behind him with a dull thud. Ethan waited until the sound of the SUV faded beyond the trees. Only then did he move. His instincts were already pulling him outside toward the truck. Ghost followed, posture alert but quiet, paws sinking softly into the snow as they circled the vehicle together. The truck sat where Ethan had left it, dusted white, looking harmless enough. He crouched by the rear wheel on the driver's side, brushing away snow with a gloved hand. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. Then he saw it. A thin, precise cut ran along the sidewall of the tire. It wasn't a tear from ice or a jagged rock. The edges were too clean, the depth too consistent. Whoever had done this knew exactly where to cut, deep enough to cause a slow leak, shallow enough that the tire would hold for a while, long enough to get him out onto a lonely road, long enough to make sure help was far away when it failed. Ethan straightened slowly, breath steady in the cold. He felt no surge of anger, no panic, just confirmation. "This is a message," he said quietly. Ghost sniffed the tire, then lifted his head, ears angling toward the trees. His body stiffened again, a ripple of tension moving through him. The dog's instincts aligned perfectly with Ethan's thoughts. This wasn't vandalism. It was surveillance with teeth. The rest of the afternoon passed in uneasy calm. Ethan patched the tire temporarily, working methodically, his movements efficient and controlled. He kept his back to the cabin only when necessary, eyes scanning the tree line between tasks. Snow continued to fall in a fine, glittering curtain, bright enough to reflect every movement, every shadow. As dusk settled, the world shifted. The light thinned, stretching long blue shadows across the clearing. The forest seemed closer somehow, branches leaning inward. Ethan secured the cabin carefully, checking locks, positioning the lantern so it cast light without revealing too much through the windows. Ghost paced once, then lay near the fireplace, head up, eyes open. Night arrived without ceremony. The wind rose again, whispering through the pines, carrying distant creaks and groans that blurred the line between nature and intention. Ethan sat at the table, the leather-bound notebooks closed in front of him, unopened for now. He understood, finally, what they represented. Whatever truth lay inside them was no longer the secret of a dead man. It was leverage, and leverage drew blood. Ghost's head snapped up. A deep, sudden growl tore from his chest, far louder than before, vibrating through the cabin like a warning siren. He surged to his feet, hackles raised, body angled toward the window. Ethan moved instantly, extinguishing the lantern with one hand and reaching for the rifle he kept near the wall. The cabin fell into shadow, lit only by pale moonlight filtering through the glass. "There," Ethan whispered. Between the dark trunks of the trees, something caught the light, a brief, sharp glint. It appeared and vanished in less than a second, like the blink of an eye. Too precise, too focused. Ethan knew that reflection. He had seen it before, in deserts and jungles half a world away. Optics. Someone was watching the cabin, watching him. Ghost growled again, lower this time, his body coiled and ready. Outside, the forest remained still, silent, as if holding its breath. The polite visit was over. The knife had been shown, and whatever game had begun, it was no longer subtle. Morning came hard and bright, the kind of winter clarity that left no place to hide. Sunlight bounced off the snow in blinding sheets, turning the clearing into a white stage where every footprint, every movement, stood exposed. The cold had sharpened overnight, tightening the air until it felt brittle enough to snap. Ethan Walker stood on the porch in his Navy working uniform, breath steady, shoulders squared, Ghost at his side like a carved sentinel. The dog's silver-gray coat glimmered against the snow, each strand catching light, his amber eyes alert but calm, as if he already knew what the day would bring. The sound arrived before the vehicle itself, a low, confident engine note that didn't struggle with the road. A brand-new pickup truck rolled into the clearing with arrogant ease, tires cutting clean lines through snow Ethan's older truck had labored to cross. The paint was dark and immaculate, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the cabin and the trees like a distorted truth. It stopped precisely where the ground was flattest, as if the driver had studied the place long before arriving. The door opened, and Victor Blackwood stepped out. Blackwood was a tall man in his late 50s, lean rather than bulky, with the kind of posture that suggested control rather than strength. He wore a tailored winter coat the color of charcoal, its lines crisp, its fabric too fine for the woods. His boots were expensive leather, spotless, not a fleck of snow clinging to them, as if the ground itself had been instructed to keep its distance. His hair was thick and silver, combed back neatly, framing a face that might have been handsome once, but had been sharpened by years of winning. A trimmed beard outlined his jaw, more fashion than neglect, and his eyes, pale, calculating, moved over the cabin with the ease of a man appraising property he already believed belonged to him. "Mr. Walker?" Blackwood called, voice smooth and warm, carrying easily across the clearing. "I hope I'm not intruding." Ethan stepped down from the porch, Ghost matching him stride for stride. "That depends," Ethan said evenly. Blackwood smiled, the practiced expression of someone accustomed to being received well. He extended a gloved hand. "Victor Blackwood, I represent interests that have been involved in this region for a long time." His gaze dipped briefly to Ghost, then back to Ethan, unfazed. "I prefer direct conversations." They did not shake hands. Blackwood seemed not to notice. He gestured vaguely at the cabin, the trees, the frozen inlet beyond. "You've acquired something complicated. People talk, they exaggerate, but complications can be resolved." He reached into his coat and produced a slim leather folder, tapping it against his palm. "I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for the property, cash, immediately." The number hung in the cold air, absurd and deliberate. $50,000 for a cabin that had sold for $500, not generosity, panic. "No," Ethan said without hesitation. For a heartbeat, Blackwood's smile held. Then it changed, not vanishing, but tightening, as if drawn with a finer blade. "Everything is for sale," he said gently. "Especially peace of mind." Ethan reached down and rested his hand on Ghost's head, fingers sinking into thick fur. The dog leaned subtly into the touch, eyes never leaving Blackwood. It was a small gesture, intimate and unyielding, a wordless declaration of loyalty. "This isn't," Ethan replied. Blackwood exhaled softly, a sound halfway between amusement and disappointment. "You're a disciplined man," he said. "I respect that. But discipline doesn't stop storms. It doesn't stop accidents." His tone cooled. "There are parcels of land that don't belong to people seeking quiet lives. They belong to projects, to progress." "I'm not selling," Ethan said again. For the first time, irritation crept into Blackwood's eyes. He nodded once, sharp and final. "Then you misunderstand the situation." He turned back toward his truck, pausing only long enough to add, "Enjoy your morning, Mr. Walker." The pickup left as smoothly as it had arrived, engine fading into the trees. The clearing felt larger and emptier in its wake. Ghost released a low breath, tension easing from his shoulders, but his ears remained forward, listening. Ethan returned inside and locked the door. The cabin seemed different now, not threatened, but chosen. He retrieved the metal box from beneath the hearthstone and carried it to the table. The latch resisted, then gave way with a dull, metallic click. Inside, there was no money, no jewels, no weapons. Instead, there were documents, neatly stacked, clipped, organized with meticulous care. Laboratory reports printed on official letterhead, maps folded and refolded until their creases were soft, small sample bags labeled in precise handwriting, soil, water, sediment. Ethan spread the papers across the table. The reports showed elevated levels of heavy metals and industrial solvents in water sources around Duluth, streams feeding the lake, wells near residential areas, runoff points along old industrial corridors. The maps were marked with circles and lines, patterns emerging the longer he studied them. This wasn't a single spill. It was systematic, controlled, hidden. Ghost lay near the fireplace, head on his paws, watching Ethan with quiet intensity. He didn't need to understand the documents to know their weight. At the bottom of the box lay a single page, heavier than the rest. Ethan lifted it and felt the shift immediately. It was an approval form, stamped and signed. The ink was dark, confident. The name beneath the signature belonged not to a company executive, but to a senior state official, a title that carried authority far beyond a single county. This wasn't corruption at the edges. It was rooted at the center. Ethan leaned back slowly, the chair creaking beneath him, the pieces aligned with brutal clarity. The harassment in the notebooks, the deliberate isolation of the cabin, the sheriff's polite warnings, Blackwood's offer. This wasn't about land, it was about silence. Outside, the sun climbed higher, making the snow blaze. The world looked clean and innocent, untouched by what lay beneath it. Ethan gathered the documents and returned them to the box, sealing it carefully. He replaced the hearthstone and brushed away the soot, restoring the fireplace to its deceptive normalcy. Ghost rose and approached, pressing his shoulder lightly against Ethan's leg. The dog's presence was grounding, a reminder that loyalty did not waver when truth became inconvenient. Ethan stood and looked out the window toward the road Blackwood had taken. The threat was no longer implied. It had a name, a face, and resources, and now it had noticed him. The storm arrived faster than forecasts ever admitted. By late afternoon, the sky had collapsed into a low, bruised ceiling, and snow began to fall, not as flakes, but as weight, thick, wet, relentless. The wind followed, sharp and directional, carving the clearing into shifting white walls. Ethan Walker watched it build from the porch, his Navy working uniform already dusted with frost, Ghost pressed close at his leg. The dog's silver-gray coat bristled with static, ears swiveling as if reading messages carried on the wind. Ethan didn't need signs to know what this meant. Storms were cover, always had been. Inside, he moved with purpose. The metal box came out from beneath the hearthstone for the last time that night, documents sorted and scanned in tight batches. He powered up the old laptop, fingers steady, breath even, and transmitted encrypted files through a shaky connection. He sent them to Sarah Miller first, because she would understand the paperwork and because she would be careful. Then to one other address he had kept dormant for years. Mark Jensen. The name carried history. Mark was a journalist now, but before that he had been something else. Lean, sharp-eyed, always watching angles. He'd learned skepticism young, after a source vanished under suspicious circumstances and left him with guilt that never quite faded. Mark was tall, narrow-shouldered, hair kept short and practical, beard usually untrimmed, the look of a man who slept in short bursts and trusted no one easily. He believed in documents more than promises and consequences more than hope. Ethan typed the final line twice to be sure it landed. If you don't hear from me by Oro 600, call Federal. Not county, not state. Federal. He closed the laptop and removed the battery, then slid the device into a waterproof bag. Ghost watched the ritual with intense stillness, the way he had watched preparations before missions that didn't allow for rehearsal. By dusk, the cabin had become a bunker. Ethan braced the door with the heavy table and chairs, wedged timber into the frame, and blacked out the windows with blankets and duct tape, leaving only narrow slits for observation. He laid the rifle within reach, checked the spare magazine, and positioned the lantern so it cast light inward without broadcasting their presence. Ghost paced once, twice, then settled near the fireplace, body angled toward the back window. His breathing was slow, deliberate, radar alive. Night slammed down hard. The blizzard howled, the wind shrieking through the trees like a living thing in pain. Snow packed against the walls, muffling sound, distorting distance. The world beyond the cabin ceased to exist, replaced by a roaring white void. Ethan listened to the storm and to Ghost. He trusted the dog more than his own ears. The lock clicked. It was a delicate sound, nearly lost in the wind, but Ghost's head snapped up instantly. A low growl began in his chest, a vibration that seemed to sink into the floorboards. Ethan moved without hesitation, killing the lantern and raising the rifle. The door handle shifted, testing. A shadow pressed against the frame. Ethan fired once, controlled, precise, into the door jamb. The crack was deafening in the small space. Wood splintered. A muffled curse followed from outside. The handle withdrew. For a breath, there was nothing but the storm. Then the back window groaned. Glass didn't shatter. It was eased aside. A shape slid through the opening, boots finding purchase with practiced economy. Ghost launched. He hit the intruder low, all muscle and momentum, slamming into the man's legs and driving him sideways into the wall. The intruder grunted, tried to recover, arms swinging up with a pistol, but Ghost was already there, jaws clamped around the forearm, pressure exact and devastating. Bone shifted, the weapon fell. Ethan closed the distance and kicked it away, rifle trained center mass. Outside, voices erupted, angry, panicked, overlapping. One of them cut through the chaos with calm authority. Enough! Ethan recognized the voice even before the name formed in his mind. Victor Blackwood. The man spoke as if issuing instructions to a boardroom, not a kill team in a blizzard. If we can't retrieve it, Blackwood continued louder now, we destroy it. Burn it! The first splash hit the window like rain, the smell following instantly. Oil. Then another. Ethan grabbed the injured intruder and dragged him toward the center of the room, Ghost releasing on command and repositioning, teeth bared, eyes wild but focused. A flaming rag sailed through the opening and landed in the pooled accelerant. Fire exploded, heat slammed into them, violent and immediate. The old logs caught fast, flames racing along seams dried by decades of winters. Smoke poured upward, thick and choking. Ethan covered Ghost's muzzle briefly, steering him toward the door as the room transformed into an inferno. He shoved the injured man back toward the fire, an offering to chaos, and kicked the door brace loose. They burst into the storm. The cold hit like a wall, shocking after the heat. Snow swallowed their boots. The cabin roared behind them, flames punching through windows, smoke clawing at the sky. Ahead, 3 figures stood in a loose arc, rifles raised. Their faces were hidden, their silhouettes sharp against the firelight, black cutouts in a white world. For a suspended moment, everything balanced on breath and trigger pressure. Ghost stepped forward, planting himself slightly ahead of Ethan, shoulders squared, growl rolling like thunder. He was a living shield, silver-gray fur blazing orange at the edges from reflected fire. Ethan felt the weight of the rifle in his hands and the weight of the promise he'd made with every scan sent, every contingency set. Blackwood's voice rose over the wind, tight with fury. "You should have taken the money." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Dawn did not arrive gently. It crept in as a gray wash, thinning the night without banishing it, turning the blizzard's violence into a cold, exhausted hiss. Snow still fell, but lighter now, drifting sideways across the clearing where the cabin burned. The fire had eaten its way through old logs and beams, leaving a roaring skeleton that spat embers into the wind. Ethan Walker stood with Ghost planted at his side, the rifle steady in his hands, breath coming slow and controlled. 3 figures faced them from the snow, weapons raised, their outlines wavering in the heat shimmer behind them. Beyond, the trees were black spears against the whitening sky. Victor Blackwood stepped forward from the arc of gunmen, his fine coat streaked with soot, his immaculate boots finally ruined by ash and slush. The confidence that had once wrapped him like tailored wool had frayed. His face, sharp and silver-bearded, was twisted now by rage and disbelief, eyes glassy with the certainty of a man who had gambled everything and watched the board flip. "This ends here," he shouted over the wind. "No one will know. Not now, not ever." Ghost answered with a low, unwavering growl. The sound cut through the crackle of fire, a living line drawn in the snow. The dog's silver-gray coat caught the first weak light of morning, edges glowing as if rimmed with frost and flame at once. Ethan felt the familiar pressure of Ghost's shoulder against his leg, grounding, insistent. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Then the air changed. At first it was a vibration felt more than heard, a distant thump that did not belong to wind or flame. The sound grew rapidly, a measured thunder rolling across the clearing. Heads turned, rifles wavered. Above the tree line, shapes emerged through the low cloud, a state police helicopter first, its markings stark against the pale sky, followed by a darker aircraft bearing federal insignia. Snow spiraled wildly beneath their rotors, flattening drifts and scattering ash. A voice boomed from the loudspeaker, amplified and absolute. "Drop your weapons, hands in the air. You are surrounded." The gunman hesitated, eyes darting to Blackwood. One by one, they made the calculation that had nothing to do with loyalty. Rifles hit the snow with dull thuds. Hands rose. Blackwood stood rigid for a heartbeat longer, jaw clenched, then flung his weapon aside with a snarl and lifted his hands, palms out. The moment broke like ice underfoot. Troopers poured in with practiced speed, figures in dark winter gear moving through the snow in clean lines. Among them was Captain Laura Finch, a woman in her early 40s with a runner's build and a posture that broadcast command without theatrics. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun beneath her helmet, face lean and windburned, eyes sharp and unflinching. She assessed the scene in seconds, voice crisp as she issued orders, directing medics to the injured and securing the perimeter with quiet efficiency. Federal agents followed, heavier vests, colder eyes. One stepped forward toward Ethan, a tall man with a weathered face and close-cropped hair, his expression controlled but curious. He introduced himself as Special Agent Daniel Ortiz. Ortiz carried himself like someone who had learned patience the hard way, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke because listening caught lies faster. He took in Ethan's uniform, the dog, the burning ruin, and nodded once, as if the pieces aligned. Blackwood watched it all with hollow fury. "You think you've won?" he spat. "The evidence is gone. Look at it." He gestured at the inferno behind Ethan. "Ash." Ethan lowered his rifle and pointed, not at the fire, but at the stone chimney that still stood, blackened but intact, rising from the wreckage like a monument. "The real evidence," he said calmly, "is under the hearth." Ghost sat when Ethan did, posture proud, tail still, amber eyes reflecting the pale sky. Snow dusted his fur, and for a moment he looked less like a dog and more like a figure carved from winter itself, steadfast and unyielding. What followed unfolded with the inevitability of daylight. Under supervision, the hearthstone was lifted from the chimney base. Beneath it, the cavity yawned open, dry and preserved. The metal box emerged intact, followed by the leather-bound notebooks. Captain Finch watched the retrieval with tight-lipped satisfaction. Agent Ortiz took custody of the materials with reverent care, gloved hands precise as he sealed them in evidence bags. The chain that had wrapped itself around Duluth for years snapped link by link. Sheriff Tom Briggs arrived late to his own reckoning, escorted in with wrists bound, his familiar mustache drooping, eyes avoiding the scene. When Ortiz matched signatures and dates from the documents to county records, the sheriff's practiced warmth evaporated. He stared at the ground, shoulders slumped, the shape of a man who had bet on silence and lost. Sarah Miller stood behind the line of responders, wrapped in a borrowed parka that swallowed her slender frame. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its knot, strands whipping in the wind, freckles stark against pale skin. She looked exhausted and terrified, and alive. When her eyes met Ethan's, they shone with a fierce, disbelieving relief, the kind that came when truth survived. By mid-morning, the storm had spent itself. The fire dwindled under the work of firefighters who had cut their way through drifts to reach the clearing. Smoke thinned. The sky brightened to a hard, clean white blue. Helicopters lifted away, carrying prisoners and promises. The clearing felt emptied, scoured. Weeks later, the snow receded in earnest. Investigations fanned outward from the box and the notebooks, following the maps and reports like veins. Wells were shut down, streams tested, treatment plants flushed and repaired. Indictments followed, first quietly, then loudly. Blackwood's empire fractured under scrutiny. Partners talked to save themselves. The contamination was contained, then reversed. It would take time to heal the land, but healing had begun. Ethan stayed. He watched crews dismantle the charred remains of the old cabin and haul away what could not be salvaged. When the ground softened, he poured a new foundation. He worked with his hands, steady and patient, raising walls that faced the lake and welcomed the sun. He rebuilt not as a refuge from the world, but as a place within it, a home chosen. Ghost remained where he always had been, near the hearth. The new fireplace was stone again, solid and honest, built to warm rather than conceal. In the mornings, light spilled across the floor and caught in the dog's silver-gray coat, turning him briefly into a bright, watchful presence. In the evenings, he lay with his head on his paws, eyes half closed, listening to the wind and finding nothing to warn against. Sometimes Sarah visited, bringing updates and coffee, her posture straighter now, her voice steadier. Sometimes Mark Jensen called with questions and thanks and the promise of follow-up stories that would keep the truth above ground. Ethan answered what he could, declined what he didn't want, and returned to the work of living. The chimney stood at the center of it all, no longer a hiding place, but a marker, a reminder that truth buried too long poisons more than the ground. Ethan had come to Duluth seeking silence. He found something better, a reason to stay. And beside the hearth, Ghost kept watch, not for secrets, but for the simple, hard-won peace that followed courage. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. They arrive quietly. In the moment a person chooses what is right over what is easy, and in the unwavering loyalty of a soul willing to stand between innocence and darkness. Perhaps God does not always step in to change our circumstances for us. Perhaps He sends signs instead, a steady instinct, a moment of courage, or even a faithful companion to remind us that truth can be buried, but it can never be erased. In our everyday lives, we face the same test. Each of us has a fireplace of our own, a fear we avoid, a truth we hesitate to uncover, a wrong we sense but remain silent about. And maybe the question God asks is not, "Are you strong enough?" but rather, "Are you willing to stay faithful to what you know is right?" If this story touched your heart, remember this. You are never alone when you choose integrity, courage, and truth. Faith, loyalty, and righteousness are miracles that still walk among us. May God bless everyone watching this video. May He protect you and your loved ones and give you the strength to stand firm, even when the world grows cold. If stories of faith, loyalty, and quiet miracles matter to you, please share this video so its message can reach others. Leave a comment about a moment that restored your faith, and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey together. God is with you, and the next story is already waiting.